coming promptly and on time, so we will start as close on time as possible. It was like a few minutes buffer. And pros and cons to the live streaming. We certainly love when people come and are able to participate in our discussions and interact with our speakers. But we've also made it very convenient for folks to stay home and see the same information. And we are live streaming tonight, and we also host our, does that mean some of you are going to leave and go home? And we also post to our website, post to our YouTube channel the next day. So it's always hard to tell about community participation. And as far as I know, Martha, we have how many hundred viewers from home at this time?
Oh, 400.
400, okay. Or we will at some point. But we are very happy you joined us tonight. A few months ago, I had the pleasure, along with some members of the board, to hear Dr. Massara present the work of Jean Twenge, the author of iGen. And it was at a workshop that was held on a Saturday as part of an overall advocacy workup to talk about important trends in education. And I've known Dr. Massara for some time, and I asked him if at that time I could impose upon him to come to Elwood to make a similar presentation, because it was so impactful on our thinking and our perspectives of the students that we're teaching and the students that we're raising in our homes. So for those of you that took on the challenge to read the book, we hope that you'll be able to share some of your insights and some takeaways that you had or any questions you had about the work. But for those of you that either didn't have a chance to complete the book or read the book, Dr. Massara's presentation is very comprehensive to take us through some of the major revelations of the work done by Dr. Twenge. So that is our goal tonight, but I just want to set the table a little bit. And first of all, thank you to the 4 members of the Board of Education who have joined us tonight. Thank you so much. The members of the administration here, thank you for attending. And for all of you that are here from the community, thank you for joining us in this discussion. There is no official committee that comes together to form by selection what a generation of people or students we call to refer to. But some, through history, you're very familiar with. Those who are age 90 and above, that was called the GI generation, also known as the greatest generation. And that were our generation that represented us in World War I and World War II, and really represented that hard work, patriot mentality. From there, those transitioned to who we would call the age about 70 to 90 now. They're referred to as the silent generation. They were characterized as those who would most conform to societal norms and have that pleasant feel to their lifestyles. From there, the next one, it's the baby boomers, which is that 10 years of all the GIs returning from war and our population exploding. The baby boomers is a generation that has been studied in so many different research projects because of that swell in our population during that time and the impact it had on our country. From there, it gets a little gray about when generations start and finish. But the next generation to be named by researchers began in the early 60s and ended in the late 70s, and that's Generation X. So I stand before you a proud Gen Xer who is most characterized by research as being perceived to be disaffected and disassociated and basically less than happy with life. That is the researcher's definition of Gen X. I hope that doesn't represent my perspectives that I brought to you, but that is how our generation has been most closely defined. Then come the millennials, and the millennials are defined loosely by those born between about 1981 and 1996. And they're also called Generation Y, in addition to being the millennials. And what they're characterized by is an increased familiarity with communications, with media, with digital technologies. They're characterized by having an increased liberal approach to their lifestyle, specifically to politics and economics and the environment and things of that nature. Those are the millennials. They're also characterized by being very fragile. Then comes the next one, the post-millennials, Generation Z, or defined by Twenge in the literature that we shared as the iGen, the internet generation. And we will talk a lot about tonight about what brings them the characteristics that make them the iGen, and that was the bulk of Twang's work and a bulk of what Dr. Massaro will take us through. But, you know, there's a lot of different words that have been used, and it'll be interesting to see through time which one of them sticks and what becomes that defining word. But you know, if you read the work, this is a generation defined by knowing nothing but the existence of the internet, knowing nothing but mobile devices, knowing nothing but communication through social media. We'll talk about all those things. One of the quick references in the Twang work is calling them screenagers, which I kind of like because of how much time they spend in their devices. But we'll talk about, you know, how they're best defined tonight. Learning more about this generation as both a parent and a student does affect the work we're doing. And you've heard a lot about some different focuses we've taken here as a school district based upon what we've learned about this generation of students. When we talk about an increased focus on the whole child, when we talk about our focus on mindfulness, when you hear areas of our budget shifting towards additional support staff or pupil personnel services in the form of guidance counselors, in the form of psychologists, when you hear class time being taken to instruct students in safe use of social media, when we hold forums about safe use of social media and the internet, it's with a purpose. It's with an understanding of the generation of students we're trying to raise and teach right now. When Dr. Massaro takes you through some things for parents to think about, it's because this generation of students are just very, very different than those who have come before. And I'm sure you gleaned that from the reading that you did, and you'll certainly be able to have a number of takeaways from the presentation tonight. But, you know, it's fun to watch students as they interact with social media. If you don't follow me on Twitter, there's some real entertainment there you're missing out on. I try to do tweets that are informative and give the community some perspective about the good things happening in our schools. And believe me, there's so many good things happening every day, and I wish you all could be a fly on the wall in this classroom, that classroom through the day. So I try to give you that perspective by just tweeting some things going on, and many members of the team have been doing the same. I think the community appreciates it. But there's some funny stuff that happens there as well. In what previous generation would members of the senior class have an ongoing dialogue with the superintendent of schools as it's snowing, convincing me to coat for the snow day? There was a rapid fire, 20, 30 members of the senior class just tweeting at me, retweeting, at-tweeting, saying, Dr. Boxer, are you awake? Are you watching this? Do you see what's happening? Other districts have closed. Why haven't we closed? What are you thinking? This is unsafe. You have to consider the faculty. I mean, really interacting through social media. This is how they engage. I tweet all the time, and I appreciate those of you that follow. I appreciate those that comment. I appreciate those that retweet and do that type of thing. It's interesting to see what the students respond to. The students don't necessarily engage with my posts about what's happening in the classroom and things like that, unless it's relating personally to them. But over the weekend, when I posted a very rare personal picture, I took a picture of my daughter on the campus that she had committed to and just said, having a parent moment, you know, here we are. That one engaged the kids. Whereas most of my tweets might get 10, 15, 20 likes, that one got nearly 100. And it was almost exclusively students. It wasn't exclusively students, but it was a large percentage of students. That's how they communicate. That's how they interact. That's how they make personal connections. And I think Dr. Massaro is going to talk about that quite a bit. This book, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, is the subtitle. When I read it, not only did I think about the children in our classrooms, I thought a lot about the two daughters I'm raising. And it may have been subtitled, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, Emily Bosser. And I'm sure some of you might have live streamed, videotaped. Emily, if you watch it later, sorry. She won't watch. If it's not on Netflix, you won't see it. But I'm sure many of you felt the same way when you thought about your own children. So this is important work, it's revealing work, and I'm happy that you're here tonight, you know, to go through it with us together. Just a brief background on my friend Dr. Massaro. Ron and I met actually in graduate school. We were both in the same program, pursuing administrative degrees. So we go way back to the 1800s when we were both teachers pursuing that administrative certification. And we formed a nice bond there, and we followed each other closely through our careers. Ron has served as a teacher, an assistant principal, and now superintendent of schools out in Remsburg, Spion. He also holds a high position in the Suffolk County Council of School Superintendents. Next year, as some of you are aware, I will be serving as president, Ron will be serving as the vice president. So he's been a wonderful voice and advocate for students across Long Island, and he has really done a great job focusing on the work. When we read the literature, we thought about trying to get Jean Tweng to come to the region to speak to us about her work. Then grew up. We thought that Ron did a very effective job presenting her work in a very succinct and appropriate way. So we decided we already had the best person available to lead us through the discussion. Plus, he works for BurgerFi. That's all I had to offer the man for him to travel out here to Remsenburg, Spion. So the price was right as well. But in addition to his professional accomplishments, Ron has 4 daughters of his own, which is an accomplishment in itself. He spends an inordinate amount of time in the lacrosse field, and I think he's had a proud parent moment recently as well, as his daughter, who's a senior, will be attending West Point in the fall. So good news to Sarah. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure. And we'll talk a little bit about the structure. Ron's going to lead the discussion, but I know many of you have insights and thoughts and opinions to share and questions to ask. When you have them, Ron, okay to ask as we go through the slides perhaps and interactions? The only thing I would ask you to do is use the microphone, because for the purpose of the live streaming and the video archiving, it's very hard to hear what's happening in the room if you don't do that. So that would be helpful moving forward. But Dr. Massera, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how this came to be. Ken and I both sit on the Suffolk County School Superintendent's Legislative Committee. And on that committee, we're constantly trying to think about things that we should be advocating for as public school leaders. And this year, part of our goals this year, and Elwood, brought in Cheryl Petty earlier in the year, we had Linda Lantieri, some of these ideas around social-emotional learning and equity, building equity. And at the Legislative Committee meeting, an article from the Atlantic, and I saw somebody here had that article from the Atlantic, that Jean Tweng had written an article. And in the article, it talked about some of these ideas about who this generation of kids in our schools is. And so I read it with great interest. Ken kind of touched on it a little bit, but I have to tell you that my background, undergrad, I was a psychology major. Okay, so this kind of stuff really kind of sparks my interest, and I'm also a big-time data research geek. I taught, graduate classes on research, so anytime there's data involved, and anytime it involves social emotional learning and those kinds of things, I really gravitate toward it. The other part of it is, as Ken said, I have 4 daughters. 3 of them are 12th grade, 10th grade, 8th grade, and they're true iGen'ers. And so I connect to this on a very, very deep level, and I can tell you that I like to call myself a survivor. So those of you out there that know what I'm talking about, that have parents in this generation, that's how I refer to myself. I'm not an expert, but I did go through this data, and I did scrutinize it, and I saw a lot of interesting insights that I gleaned from this, and that's kind of what I present. I've done this presentation as a way to advocate for more mental health resources. I've done this presentation to talk to parents about what they can do for their kids. I've done this with teachers. I've done this with school management leaders to talk about what we need to know about the kids that are in our schools, because it's that important. They're very, very different. So this is a unique situation because I haven't had a group of people who have actually read the book before, because the book is relatively new. So what I would say is, typically what I would do is I'd go through the presentation. At the end we'd have a question and answer, but as Ken suggested, I think it would be perfectly appropriate if people have insights and things that they want to share. I'm happy to stop at any point and have further conversation. But I would say that, typically my goal, as I said, superintendents have believed that mental health services are needed. And so I'm going to go through my first slide here. And what this slide shows is that if superintendents throughout New York State, so there's 700 superintendents in New York State, and they were asked a question on an annual survey, and that survey said, if you had more money that was not going toward sustaining your educational program, what would you spend it on? And so before 2013, they didn't really talk about mental health that much. But somewhere around 2013, about 23%, 22% started to say, I think we'd like to put our money on social workers, mental health professionals, and things like that. By the time 2017, it was the number one thing superintendents reported that they thought we needed to spend extra money on, and that we needed extra funding for it. So the next slide shows this, and it shows all of the things that they had recommended. You can see in 2013, the blue starts off there, but you see a very steep incline from 16 to 17, a 17% increase. And that's a dramatic increase. But the thing is, it was the intuitive feel. We didn't really know what was going on. We knew that there were more incidents that we needed to address with our kids, but we didn't have the why. So I think what Jean Twang did for us is provided some insight as to, intuitively, we knew social media, there's some really good things. I love watching Ken's tweets. And yes, I did like the That's great. So intuitively we knew. And we also like our social media. But there are some things that we perhaps didn't understand and we thought might be contributing to some of the issues that kids are facing. And if you have kids, you know that. How many people out here have children that are on social media? So, pretty much most of us. And so I think that is something that we really need to be looking at. So this presentation basically, again, has been used to advocate for why we need more mental health services, to provide the parents, but really it's for totally trying to understand who these kids are in our schools. So the book, as you all know, Jean Twang, for those that did not read the book, Jean Twang is a generational researcher at San Diego State University. And she's been doing this for 30 years. And so she has a high degree of credibility on this topic. And Ken had an opportunity to go through all those generations, and very clearly, generations are marked by certain stereotypes, I guess, for those generations, and some good, some bad. I am a Gen Xer, and I'd like to believe I don't fulfill that description as well. But the kids who are iGen'ers, okay, those are the kids that are born between 1995 and 2012. So the oldest of these kids are hitting the workforce. So they're 22, 23 years old, and they're in our workforce, and they're a little bit different. They're seeing the world differently. The youngest of these kids is in our kindergarten classes. And so that's the group that we're talking about. As we know, these kids grew up with smartphones, have never not had one. They don't remember a time before the internet. So that simple recall is unnecessary to them. I talk to my college kids that I teach on Wednesday nights, and they don't have any interest in simple recall because they know that they can pull up any little piece of information. And Instagram accounts before us. Whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, any kind of social media, they typically have it prior to high school. I know, and again, I'll talk a little bit about my kids just because I think that there's a connection there. We had a rule in our house that when the kids go over to middle school, they go to the big school. That's their 7th grade year. That's when they get their phone. My oldest always likes to remind me that the phone she had the little flip screen and the push button keyboard, and I hadn't, never hear the end of that because my second had a smartphone. And that's a big deal. So she had to read. But Jean Twang in her book identifies, and the conversation was happening over here before here, talking about those I trends. So if she's going to refer to them as iGen, she came up with 10 I words that she would describe this generation. The first one being in no hurry, growing up slowly. So essentially she says they put off typical adult behaviors to later. Okay? They try to actually really put it off, and you'll see as we take a look at some of the data. Second, clearly, this is just a function of living these days, is that there's going to be increased screen time. But you know what? One of the things that I would say is when we talk about screen time, I think we have to discriminate what she's referring to as screen time from what other people might refer to as screen time. She's not talking about when you're in an academic setting and you're working on a project, you're writing a paper. That's not the kind of screen time that we're talking about. Okay? So if you'd otherwise be writing with paper and pencil or doing math calculations, or doing those math calculations or writing a paper on a computer, that's not necessarily the kind of screen time that we're talking about. In person, no more. So there's a precipitous decline in in-person interaction amongst our kids. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but significantly less. They are insecure. They are the safest generation physically, Gene Tweng would say, but they are the most insecure emotionally and the most fragile emotionally. And we'll talk a lot about that. In terms of irreligious, they are less religious in this group than previous generations. Insulated but not intrinsic. When we talk about insulated, again, safest generation, physically, but emotionally, they're very vulnerable. They value safety over pretty much anything. And that's something that I actually added a slide post-Parkland to talk about, because I have a connection to that that I will share. And not intrinsic. They really are not necessarily looking to do things because it'll make them feel like they accomplished something. They are actually more responsive to extrinsic goals. Income insecurity, they're the first generation that essentially believes that they can't make a living doing what they really want to do and what they love. Indefinite. Basically, according to what Gene Tweng would say, is that our society is going to start to resemble more like Europe. So there'll be less committed relationships, children out of wedlock, less children, perhaps even a declining population in our country because less children will be born to parents. So definitely less committed relationships is something that she points out here. They're inclusive. Although they're not out there and really interacting and having those kinds of interactions with other people, they want to make sure that every single person alive, their rights are protected. And they're very, very adamant about that. And then finally, they're independent. They are less likely to affiliate with any one political party than previous generations. And again, I clarified earlier saying that I'm a data geek, okay? And so one of the things that to me was very relevant with Gene Tweng's research is that everything that she did, okay, starting with the Monitoring the Future survey, all of the surveys she used cover publicly accessible data. So any single person here, and I have gone on and I have Googled this data, and I have pulled up the Monitoring the Future survey and really dug through it myself to try to look for some different trends that were of interest to me. But that's a survey that 12th graders since 76 and 8th and 10th graders since 91. So there's a lot of data there. All told, between all four surveys, over 11 million participants. Okay, so 11 million, that's what we call a big N in research. And you can pull a lot of really valuable data when you have those kinds of numbers. So going back to the 70s, all the way up to 2016 is where our research goes. That's 11 million people. The Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, that's administered by the Centers for Disease Control, and that has been administered since 1991. The American Freshman Survey, that's for kids heading out to four-year colleges, since 1966. And the General Social Survey, which is adults 18 and older. So the first idea that she talks about is this idea of being insulated and having safety as their top priority. She refers to them as the generation of the car seat. I don't know about you, but I was in a wood-paneled wagon laying in the back, and anything could have happened with my two brothers. It's a very, very different perspective. So these kids have always been made to feel safe, and that's what they expect. And they expect that they're going to be kept safe by their parents, who are helicopter parents. These kids are protected every turn. And we see that. Sometimes we see that in our schools. We see, and I try to connect to some of the previous things we have. Last year we had a speaker in Suffolk School Superintendents, Jessica Leahy, who wrote The Gift of Failure. And what she would push back, she would push back against helicopter parents who bring the gym sleepings and the homework to the school every day. And we see that. We see that happening in our schools. And that the kids, they don't have to worry about it because mom and dad are taking care of it. In 1969, 48% of kids rode their bikes to school. I'm not sure what it is now, but statistically it's about less than 13%. That's a pretty dramatic difference. Kids don't do the kinds of things that they used to do, that they could navigate socially, and they could navigate, potentially look at as something being risky. Physical fighting is actually, and our kids come home and they tell us when there's a fight. So we think that there's a lot of fights, but the statistics are saying that fighting is down by about 10% in schools for all grades 9 to 12. Sexual assault is down. It's been cut in half, 18 to 24-year-olds. The avoidance of risky behaviors is down. I tell a story. When I was a kid, we used to ride our bikes, and there were two hills side by side in the woods. One hill was a really steep hill that went down, and it was a hard dirt path. And we used to call that Killer Hill. And we used to go down as fast as we could. We'd get down to the bottom, and you get up, and you take a deep breath. The other side was just as steep, but it was all gravel. We called that one Suicide Hill. And you were crazy if you went down Suicide Hill. But those were the kinds of things that you just did because it was like a coming of age thing as a young kid. We don't see our kids out there doing those kinds of things. When I was a kid, we left at 8, mom gave us breakfast. We got on our bikes with a bucket and a fishing pole. We were gone until probably dinner time. And kids aren't doing those kinds of things anymore. But, the safety goes beyond the physical. Some of the decisions, and I can talk about this because, when we look at the trends, and the trends make sense, right? Because if there's less in-person social interaction, there has to be less violence, there has to be less sexual assault. Those are natural byproducts of less social interaction. But safety goes beyond the physical. When we talk about kids, the biggest thing that they're worried about is doing something that's going to end up on somebody else's social media. So they're really worried about their reputation and their emotions. We see in our schools, and we see a trend, and we see it on our college campuses, where kids are afraid to have disagreements with other people. And you see it in the news. Speakers come into a college campus, and what do? They protest because that person's got different ideas. How dare they have different ideas than me? So we create safe spaces for kids, because they have to feel safe. It's the most important. The story I'll tell now is a very interesting one because I think it shows the power of social media. I guess what I'd say is that Valentine's Day this year changed my whole world, changed my whole paradigm. When I was at work, around 3 o'clock that day, I got a text in our family group chat. And what my sister-in-law was informing us was that there was an auditorium like this, and my nephew was hiding under the seats in the auditorium at Stoneman Douglas High School. So I know that my 3 daughters who were on social media are connected to Brandon. And so I left work around 3:30, and my mission was to go to Allison's basketball game, who was my 14-year-old, and to try to catch my other two girls who were leaving their winter lacrosse practice. And I got them on the phone, and Emily said, "No, Dad, we already left. And by the way, we already know about Brandon." I said, "Okay." And I called Allison after her game, and I talked to her, and I said, "Brandon's okay. He's getting reunited with Aunt Cindy and Uncle Keith, but you just need to know that this is what's happening." And, there was a reason why I did that, and it's because I knew they were going to find out. And I didn't want them to find out through social media. What I didn't realize, and the reason I say it changed my world so much, is because I had this new clarity and this new awareness for how powerful the social media was when I got home from teaching my graduate class that night. Now, it's an educational psych class, so what did we talk about? My students walked in to the news footage, and we talked about why these things are happening in our society. And we talked about what school responses must be. And we talked about all those kinds of important things. But when I got home, it was about 8:30 at night, and my wife said, "Elizabeth's still hysterical." And I said, "She is?" And then I put it together. When kids were live streaming the events in Parkland, they were videotaping everything. And because she was connected to Brandon, she was connected to Brandon's friends, and when they were videotaping themselves, walking through the carnage, Elizabeth was looking for Brandon. She didn't believe me that he was okay. So it wasn't until 9:30 that night when I went up and I talked to her, and she was just upset. 9:30 that night, he texted her back, because she texted him. And he said, "Elizabeth, I'm okay. Thanks so much, I love you too." And she came down and she was beaming and she was happy. And but she saw what she saw, and she can't unsee what she saw. And so the next day, I went to school and I called my crisis team and I said, "You know what, we need to be thinking more globally about this, because these events now have a residual effect that's far, far, far greater than just the park, or wherever that situation is." So we need to be thinking about that these kids are seeing things that it's not a video game. They know it's not a video game. This is real life, and they're witnessing it firsthand. So it really is something that we have to consider. So in terms of the safety, and if you read the book, you know that seniors who have ever gotten a speeding ticket were 37% in 2000. In 2014, that's 20%, so 17% reduction. That's good. It's driving safety. The second trend that we talk about, the advocacy. Oh, you know what? And that was the other point I wanted to say about is the advocacy. So the advocacy doesn't surprise me, because if they value safety more than anything, the fact that these students throughout the entire country coalesced around Parkland and said we need to do something about gun safety, it doesn't surprise me at all. Because these kids want to be safe more than anything. And so the advocacy is something that makes it total sense as an outgrowth of Parkland. Tell one more story. I was driving 2 days after Parkland, and I was on Northern State Parkway heading west, and as I went to merge on, there was somebody doing this on his phone and kind of cut me off, and I had to go into the shoulder. So a couple miles down the road, I was driving past, I was in the left lane, and I just kind of looked over, and I just picked up my phone and I went like this. And I said, just, kind of just watch the phone. My daughter reacted, I've never seen her act like this. She said, "Dad, what are you doing?" I said, "Elizabeth, I'm just making a point that he really needs to stay off his phone." She said, "Dad, you don't know if he's got a gun." That's what a 15-year-old thinks. So, to me, I said, I'm just connecting dots in here as a psychologist, and I'm thinking, wow, that's what's going on in her mind, is that's how important safety really is to this kid. And that's pretty remarkable. So, the Indo-hurry idea, this idea of growing up slowly, they are absolutely 100% going out less. Compared to previous generations, they are going out without their parents much less. They are driving later, they're dating less, they're having less sex, they work less, they drink less alcohol. In 2016, 40% of high school seniors said they never tried alcohol. We look at them and say, no, that can't be. But you know what? I was sharing some data with Ken, and this is data, this is 2017 data, and these are anonymous surveys. There's the Southampton Teen Assessment Project, and when they talk about their alcohol use, it's not disaggregated, but it's 8th through 12th graders. Ever used? 32% said they ever used. That's 8th through 12th graders. So they are drinking less, and that's what the data says. And here's what it looks like on here. The less sexual activity, down 40% since 1991. The teen birth rate has now hit an all-time low. So some of these are, and it's funny because you look at these and you say, well, there's nothing funny about it, but you look at these and you say that there's data out here, and these are trends, and some of these are good trends. We want to see kids drinking less. We want to see less teenage pregnancies. We want to see a teen birth rate at a 67% decrease. Remarkable. But when you think about it, and what the cost of it might be, that's a little bit frightening. And we can talk a little bit about that because it makes sense that these trends are going the way they're going. They work less. And again, I have a high school senior. I'm very proud of her. She made an incredible decision for the future of her life. But she really did not want to get a job. She did not want to work. And she did. We made sure that she worked and she waitressed and she did some of those things that she should do. But it was not something that she wanted to do. And again, as I said, I'm a survivor. So my 10th grader is getting a summer job. And my 8th grader, she's going to be working. Because as I look at this data, I'm changing my ideas. And my wife and I are really thinking about some of these things and what we want our kids to be doing. If I think about my 12th grader, that job she had, waitressing, or busing, and working as a counter girl at Who We Want in Riverhead, you know what? There's a lot of social interaction that has to take place on a daily basis there. And there are a lot of times that, you get somebody that's upset, you get somebody that's happy, you get somebody, wow. And when you really think about it, that's missing from a lot of kids that didn't have those jobs. When I was in 9th grade, I was cutting bologna at Walmart's. And enjoying it. But hey, and I probably have had 15 jobs in my life, and I think that that's a good one. But they absolutely work less. Only in the 70s, 77%, in the mid-2010s, only 55%. The important thing about this, though, is that the generalizability on this data is huge. Okay, so we're talking about race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion. This goes across every stratus of society. And I think that that's a very interesting thing. So this is the big one, right? This is the screen time. This is what we talk about with iGen'ers. And so if you saw in January, there was an article in the New York Times. And two of the biggest investors in Apple, a couple $1 billion in investments, started to say that they started to warn that iPhones and technology could be hurting kids. So now you have one of the biggest tech companies, if not the biggest tech company in the world, saying that this technology might be hurting children. Interesting when you read the article, one of those investors was the California Teachers Retirement System. So there were educators that were looking at it. I'm trying to convince the New York TRS to invest in that. Not quite there yet. But the important thing, I think, with this is that Steve Jobs, who's gone a couple of years, when he was alive, he limited his kids' screen time. There was a New York State School Board Association interview with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates was talking about limiting kids' screen time. Every tech CEO in Silicon Valley limits their children's screen time. So it is something that they know while they're pushing those products our way and want us to buy them and give them to our kids. And, yeah, and I'm not sure how it is in this community, but there are second graders walking around with smartphones in my community. And I'm sure that's what's happening here as well. But iGen'ers, they are texting, their internet, their social media, their electronic gaming, and video chat. That's the screen time we're talking about. Again, when I talk about an academic task, writing a paper, doing complex math and those kind of things, it's different. But this kind of stuff is the stuff that Gene Twenge talks about. So for social media, 87% of girls and 77% of boys are on every single day. That's not just sometimes, that's every day. I would suggest that this is probably a little bit higher now, because I think it's increasing every year. By 2015, it didn't matter what race, class differences didn't exist. And so 3 years ago now, only 3% could say they never use social media. So virtually all rising kids will. And the data, those of you that read the book, were probably as shocked as I was. High school seniors are on 6 hours a day. And again, not in the academic tasks, multitasking between texting, internet, social media, and those kinds of things. And 8th graders, 5 hours a day. Not much of a difference. So, if you put a monitoring device on a college kid's computer, the screen changes every 19 seconds. That's what we're doing. That's a different kind of kid. They are reading less books than we read. Very, very different. The Monitoring the Future survey is one of the surveys I talked about earlier, but I'm bringing this up because they started measuring rates of happiness and trying to correlate that with leisure activities, most recently screen time. So screen activities, social media, texting, those kind of things. And this big survey that's been around for a long time, since 1976, came up with a conclusion. And it's a pretty dramatic conclusion. Teens who spend more time than average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy. And I find that interesting that the survey came out and put that out there. But as we go through Twenge's research and as we look at the data, that's what we're finding. This is some local flavor, right? You guys remember this? So I jokingly say that, like, hey, I grew up in Hop Hog, and I made the trip in 1978 and 1979. I made the trip every Friday night to the Comac Roller Rink. That was my place. And what we did there is we went there and we learned to be out there and to be social. These places don't exist so much anymore. You know, when I was there, it was like, you couldn't wait, you know, you were so, the year before I was allowed to go, my brother was going, and I would go in the car and I would see all these kids out front, going on right, and John would get out of the car and I'd, come on, Mom, let me go, she wouldn't let me go. When I hit 7th grade, I was allowed. And then Mom would drop us off and come pick us up 2 hours later. But in that time, we really had fun. We roller skated, we had our super pretzels and our pina coladas, right? And you know, just sat there and worked on those social navigation skills. Couple skate, scary. But you had to navigate that, didn't you? So, iGen'ers do not do those kinds of things. When I first started teaching in West Hampton Beach, the bowling alley was the place. Kids all went to the bowling alley. Bowling alley is the CBS now. It's hurting my heart that Toys R Us is closing. It really does. That's one of my fondest memories, right? Shopping at Toys R Us and going to pick out your, or just even pointing to stuff and hoping that it shows up under the Christmas tree. But, you know, and those are real. And you know, when I read this book, I started to Google some of the malls around the country that have been abandoned. And that's true. You could Google it, you can see it, and it's absolute fact that because of online activity, online shopping, and things like that, many of these institutions are going by the wayside. So they're not. You know, we used to go to the Smith Haven Mall, we'd get dropped off there, we'd walk around Smith Haven Mall. That was fun for us. Spent a lot of time there. The number of teens who get together with their friends nearly every day, down 40%. 40%, it's amazing. So these things have all been replaced by virtual spaces on phones. College kids spend 4 hours fewer socializing. They spend 3 hours fewer partying each week, 7 hours total, less in-person time. So college kids, over the course of one, so, you know, and then you can multiply that out, right, over the course of a year. Holy cow, 7 hours a week less in-person time. Teens, our teens in our high schools are spending an hour less per day as well. This is one of the things that they don't even understand. So it's a Friday night. It's around 11 o'clock at night. I'm already in bed. I go to bed. It's 11 o'clock on Friday night. I'm in bed and I hear loud music. You can verify that. Because Ken's always texting and I'm not answering. So, but it's 11 o'clock at night. I hear loud music coming from my 14-year-old's room. So I leave. Go downstairs, and I go in there. And I see the loud music, the portable speaker with the Bluetooth is going, and my daughter's got her cell phone, and she's dancing. And she's just dancing around. And she's having a dance party. And I asked her, what are you doing? She's like, we're in a house party, Dad. I said, you're not in a house party right now. What she didn't understand was, what I didn't understand was that there were 8 other people on their phones, in-house party, doing the same thing in their rooms. And the conversation became, you don't socialize with your friends like you need to. And she said, yeah, we do. We do it all the time, Dad. We just do it on our phones. And that's remarkable because that's their understanding of being out. When my high school senior was in 8th grade, she didn't go out a lot. I said, well, maybe she was shy. Maybe she, you know, that's okay. 9th grade, she didn't go to the football games. Tried to encourage her to go to the football games, show some school spirit. Nah, I don't really want to do that, Dad. Now, she's in, I think, 76-day countdown to our day at West Point. She's trying to make up for lost time, and she wants to go out every weekend. She wants to go out on Friday, she wants to go out on Saturday night. What's her complaint? My friends aren't doing anything, Dad. And sometimes, you know, they're going out, they're going to parties, they're doing those things, but not as much as she would like to now that she knows she's getting ready to go away. Very interesting. This, I think, is a fascinating slide. And this slide basically compares the internet 10 or more hours a week and in-person social interactions. So that's internet use from 2009 to 2015, 10 or more hours a week. And that's what in-person social interaction looked like over the course of that same time. Internet screen time has surpassed the in-person. So, Monitoring the Future survey talked about happiness and how happiness has deteriorated over the years due, in their eyes, to social media. So 8th graders who spend 10 plus hours on social media are 56% more likely to report being unhappy than those who spend less time. If they're on for 6 to 9 hours, it's 47% still. And what we're talking about, this is 6 to 9 hours per week, 47% less likely. And we're talking about kids that are on there 6 hours a day. Those who spend an above average amount of time with friends are 20% likely to report being unhappy. There are 3 Facebook studies out there that say that the increased use of Facebook causes unhappiness. Kids who are on every day are likely to report, when you ask them, how often do I feel lonely, that they'll report more likely. The risk for unhappiness when you list the risk factors for unhappiness, there are positive influences. The biggest positive influence for happiness is sports activities, and then religious activities, print media, in-person social interaction, and even homework. I guess that feeling of accomplishment for completing your homework. But the negative influence, every single screen activity, internet, social networking sites, texting, computer games, video chat, every single one of those are indicators for unhappiness. That's interesting. So there's a social skills study that was done by Ulzen in 2014. And you take kids and you put them in a camp, okay? And you've got kids that go to summer camps all the time. And you take a control group and you remove their social media, okay? And you take another group and you let them play on their phones and have access to their social media. And you remove all technology from the one group, let everybody do what they were doing in the other. And the kids who spent time away from screens improved on measures of their, in 5 days, improved in measures of social skills. So if you show them a video of two people interacting, they could determine mood, they could determine all those kinds of things. Show them a picture, they could determine how that person might be feeling, naming emotions and stuff like that. There is a mental health crisis going on, and social media is contributing to it and helping or contributing to make kids feel insecure. When kids, when I look at I look at, Ken's Facebook profile, and I see this perfect family, the husband, and I really know what's going on. Because I'm an adult, I can discriminate, And I've been there. No, I say that kiddingly, but we all know. We've all seen Facebook profiles of some families that might not be exactly what they're presenting. And we can discriminate between that, can't we? Kids, not necessarily. They're seeing these perfect profiles out there, and they're thinking, wow, she's really got it going on. He's really got it going on. And I'm so uncertain about myself. If they only see successes out there, that's all people post. When they fail, they think they're the only ones that ever fail. And that hurts their psyche. This is an important one. The non-responses to a text. Ken talked about poor Ken. When he talks about important stuff, he only gets 3 likes. But when he talks about other stuff that's relevant to kids, he gets 100 likes, right? So I feel bad for Dr. Bosser, but at the same time, I can tell a story that I was driving to Penn State with my daughter, and one of my daughters, and it was snowing. It was in January. Snow was coming down really heavy. And so I texted my wife before I left from where I was at a gas station. I said, honey, snow's really come down. It's whiteout conditions. I'm going to take my time. I'll call you when I get there. So as I'm driving, I'm like this. I'm white knuckling. I'm nervous getting there. Driving very, very slowly. It takes us about 3 hours to get to Penn State. I pull over into a gas station. I look at my phone, and I've got a bunch of texts. Scrolling through it, some from friends, and then I see my wife. She asked 3 questions, and the last question said, why aren't you answering me? So even adults do it. Even adults do it. But kids take it to a much deeper level. It's anxiety producing for kids. 48% more girls and 27% more boys said they felt left out. When my daughter last Sunday was in her room and she got very upset, she said, all my friends went to Friendly's night. I wasn't invited. I said, really? Who was there? Well, because when we were growing up, if I asked a couple of people here to go to Friendly's, we went to Friendly's, we came back, and nobody knew we were there. Now they take a picture, Lauren was there, she had a milkshake. She had the fribble and she had the, clam platter. But, they know what everyone's doing at every minute of the day. So of course they're going to feel left out. So 31% more 8th graders and 10th graders reported being lonely in 2015 than 2011. So this picture of Dwight here, this FOMO, and if you don't know what that is, that's fear of missing out. That's real. That's real for kids, that this is what's going on in their life. You know, there was a Time article in 2014, and in that article, they did some work with brain researchers, and they tested to check the neural activity in kids. And what they found was that when they put kids in games and then they left them out of games, the exact same regions of the brain that register pain registered when they were left out. I find that really interesting. That kids are manifesting this idea of being left out, and it feels like pain. When you talk to somebody who really understands depression, a psychiatrist, they'll tell you that the kids who are truly depressed are feeling real pain. And that's the proof right there. Sleep deprivation. This is next to most kids' beds. It's the last thing they look at before they go to sleep. It's the first thing they look at in the morning, and they get 2 or 3 alerts during the night. And we know the kids need 7 hours of sleep, because if they don't get 7 hours of sleep, it's one of the major indicators of depression. So in 2015, 57% more teens were sleep deprived than 1991. If you have 3+ hours of screen time a day, you're 28% more likely to be sleep deprived. And teens who use social media daily are 19% more likely to be sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation, we know, is linked to anxiety and depression. We really can't let them have these things in their lives. Less than 7 hours of sleep, 68% more likely to have risk factors for suicide. And then if we look at the depression, the more time teens spend on their phones, the more likely they are to report having feelings of depression. Let's look at 8th graders. 10+ hours of social media, 56% more likely to be unhappy. And 27% increased risk for depression. Teens who spend 3 hours a day on more electronic devices, 35% more likely to have risk factors for suicide. Now, these are direct correlations. And we know that correlations do not necessarily mean causality, but there's a lot of breadcrumbs out there, right? When you follow the trail, there's something there. And we really need to be looking at these things. As far as depression goes, the relative risk of high depressive symptoms for 8th graders, again, positive influences. Number 1 positive influence is sports and exercise. Religious services, print media, homework, in-person social interaction. Those 5 things are the most helpful for depression. The negative influences for depression, social networking sites, number 1. Cyberbullying. Again, with the rise of social media, with the rise of technology, we knew that this was a problem. DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act, explicitly focused on this and made sure that schools understood that when this stuff happens out there, it's going to come back into your school, you're going to need to be worried about it. And so we know that. So let's see, the number of teens reported being cyberbullied in 2007, it was 19%, in 2016, 34%. And again, when I look at the Southampton Town Teen Assessment Project, that number's up. Because that data came out in December of 2017, so it's a little bit fresher and more localized. 12 to 15, depressive symptoms increased by 21% for boys, 50% for girls. And girls who have experienced a major depressive episode in the last 12 months, in 2015, over 19%. It's 1 in 5. "56% of my teens experienced a major depressive episode from 2015 to 2010. The research says that 1 in 9 teens suffer from major depression, 11%. And, again, this is, across all demographics. So Black, white, Hispanic, all regions of the United States, SES, small towns, suburbs, big cities. So this is the localized data. Southampton Town has been doing a teen assessment program survey for, it goes back, I think, since 2002. They do it every 3 years, so it's about the 5th or 6th administration. So this data is data that has not been disaggregated by grade level, but it is the data that is most recent from December of 2017. So it hasn't really been published yet, but it was shared with me. So it's a survey of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, and a few thousand kids from about 7 high schools. And the mental health data that we're looking at, 88.4% said that reported feeling anxious or stressed in the last month. That's a remarkable number. 79% said they had anxiety or stress that affected their schoolwork. 65% said that it affected their social life. I know that if you ask my kids, I think they'd report yes on both of these, all 3 of them. Experienced symptoms of depression in the last year, 43.2%. And then the worst of the worst, considered suicide in the past year, 10.2. Performed an act of self-injurious behavior in the past year, 9.8%. So that's 1 in 10 kids is either contemplating suicide or exhibiting self-injurious behaviors in our schools. That's in Southampton. The hot topic a couple of years ago was this book, 13 Reasons Why, in the movie. The book was written actually in 2007. When the movie came out, it was an adaptation, because if you read the book wasn't about social media because it was written in 2007. When you watch the movie, the precipitating event was an interaction with a boy and a girl, a picture taken, and then salacious comments and things like that. And that's what led down the path. So this was a depiction of what social media can do to a kid. 2011 teen suicide rate was higher than the teen homicide rate. First time in 24 years. So we got less in-person social interaction. That makes sense. And that moves at the same rate. That homicide rate and the in-person social interaction rate moves at the same rate. From 2007 to 15, among 12 to 14-year-olds, twice as many boys committed suicide and 3 times as many girls. When they measure the suicide rates, they do it in how many incidents there are in 100,000 of the population. So in 2007, 1.75 boys out of 100,000 committed suicide. In 2015, that number went to 3.5, so it doubled. For girls, it was under 1, it was 0.75 in 2007, and now it's 2.5 in 2015. So boys have always tended to use much more lethal means, and that's why they have been more successful at committing suicide. But that gap is closing now. Both trends are bad, but the trend for girls is worse. So, this is something that we've been working with. And this is the model that CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, uses. And basically it's got the 5 categories. And this is something that Linda Lantieri, who spoke for Suffolk County School Superintendents. Did you have Linda here too? And Linda Lantieri spoke at Elwood. She's a part of this collaborative, and it's something that we're embracing as a framework to make sure that we are focused on. And I can tell you, in my school, we are doubling and tripling down on the social emotional learning piece. We're doing everything we can to try to build the perseverance and resilience in our kids so that they recognize that they actually can be empowered and self-regulate. So we have this greater emphasis on social emotional learning. I had a teacher come to me just yesterday, true story, and she came up and she said, little guy in kindergarten, you know who I'm talking about, Dr. Massara. And I said, I know who you're talking about. I won't use the name here. And she said, you won't believe what happened. I said, tell me about it. She said he was about to have a meltdown, like he does sometimes, and he turned around and he stopped and he stood like this doing it. And he started to breathe and he got control of himself and he didn't have his typical meltdown. We're explicitly teaching kids how to do this. I have parents coming up and saying, Dr. Massara, I'm not sure what you're doing, but I started yelling at my son the other day and he said to me, Mom, you need to stop, you need to breathe. Let's do a fist of 5 together. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And she thought it was hysterical. But the kids are really internalizing this and trying to self-regulate, so it's very interesting. So we are explicitly teaching social skills to kids. We are stopping and we are actually using conversation starters and those kinds of things so that kids can learn to interact and find out more about those other kids that they might not know as well in their classes. Interesting. We have unstructured recess play before school starts. So kids come in at 8:30 in the morning in elementary and they don't go to their class till 8:50. And so they can have absolutely unstructured time where they can interact and learn to navigate social situations. I had a chance to listen to a cultural anthropologist, pretty prominent one from one of the Ivies, and he was talking about play and how important this non-structured play was. And I was with him the whole way. I agreed 100%. Kids need to learn these social navigation skills. And I'll tell you where he lost me. There was a point in the conversation where one of the parents at the end, I was going to ask a question. Parent raised her hand and she said, so what you're saying is kids should have unstructured play? I said, absolutely. She said, well, how about this? If my kid is at home, in her room, on her phone, on social media, or I could take her to a dance class that is going to be structured, what would you recommend I do? I didn't think he was going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. He looked at her and he said, well, just as spears and arrows were the tools of a culture years and years and years ago, social media and technology are the tools of today's society. So if she wants to be on that, you should just let her stay on that. And I thought, the rest of the hour I spent here was wasted because I'm not buying it. Get out and do something and get off your phone, is what I felt like saying. We're using universal screeners for emotional instability, and we're administering to every child. We're doing a lot of community building things, getting the entire school together so that they can get to know each other and connect with one another and celebrate each other's successes. We're doing yoga and mindfulness, as expressed by that one student. We're doing these kinds of things. We're having lots of conversations with parents, we're doing presentations, doing community reads. We're actually reading Linda Lantier's book as a community, and we'll be meeting next week to talk more about this and Linda's book. We've also actually taken a look at our behavioral indicators on our report card and said, well, how can we actually measure, and what kind of rubrics can we use to measure whether or not kids are resilient and they are persevering? Because that's what we want to see. We want to see the kind of grit that it takes to overcome when you're knocked down. So there's a lot that needs to be done and a lot of conversations that have to happen. So that brings us to the parent piece, and I think that, and I'm never professed to be an expert on any of this. I'm interested in the data, and I'm interested in trying to raise 4 healthy kids and try to impact and get this message out there. When Ken asked me to come and have a conversation about this, I jumped at the opportunity to have this conversation because this information needs to be out there. And I don't care who's presenting it, somebody needs to present it. And somebody needs to talk and have this get this conversation started. But I think that as far as parents, this idea, sometimes we're the worst, right? We might be on our phone too much, and we might be doing things. And when the kids ask us a question, we're looking at something and we're on our phones. And we need to think about those kinds of messages we're sending to our kids. It's not that difficult to help select educational media that encourages creativity and does good things for kids. My 3rd grader believes that she is a member of a YouTube family. She's like the 3rd daughter or something like that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there are YouTube families that just go around, they videotape their whole world. My daughter loves that. That's her favorite thing to watch. And she knows them by name. She knows what they like. She knows what kind of cake they have on their birthday. Because they videotape every aspect of their life. They throw them on YouTube. It's unbelievable. And we have to say, no, you can't watch that, honey. Sorry. Co-view content or play the games with the kids. Promote the healthy stuff. The stuff, those indicators for positive, for happiness. Do those kinds of things. Make sure they're getting sleep. Make sure they have family meals. Physical activity, very important. Dr. Bostard and I were talking about disconnecting from entertainment media while they're doing their homework. Homework's actually a positive indicator. But if they're being left out of texts while they're doing it, how can they think about it? It's the lowest level of Maslow's needs. Safety of the home. If they're being excluded or they're not going to be thinking clearly. Don't let kids have devices in their rooms. We have when I started doing this kind of work, we finally moved toward family charging stations. And we said, that's it. All the phones have to be in one particular spot every night, and there's no excuses for not having them there. Implement media-free zones, so the dinner table, wherever. A lot of when kids go out to half-price apps and stuff like that, some of the kids will put their phones in the middle, and the first kid to pick up their phone has to pay for the meal. It's kind of a nice strategy. This has been the best for me, is to have these honest conversations. Because when I look at the data, the one group I didn't tell you I presented to is a group of iGen kids. And I presented to the college kids, the undergrad kids, and the college grad students. And it was interesting, they really connected to it. When I talk to my own daughters, they will never admit that I'm right, but their favorite response is, "You're not wrong, Dad." So I take that as I'm right. And I think you have to discuss that, hey, there are benefits of social media. I want to know when Elwood's closed. First. We all do that. There's a little trick. As superintendents, we always put it on social media first because that gets your following up. And I will take a shot here. You do like that you have more followers than me. I don't take that personal. I'm an adult. Correct. Monitor screen time, set clear expectations and limits. This one was big for us and my family. Always present the united front. Because, we found ourselves, when we settled on that time, well, what was the right time for the family charging station? And, oh, no, let's just give it back to her. Because I took my daughter's phone away, and this has happened on multiple occasions, but when you take a 14-year-old's phone away, you've destroyed their world because you've killed their streaks. And if you don't know what streaks are, I take a picture of myself, I send it to you, you send one back, that's a one-day streak. These kids have 300 streaks that go over 600 days. And that's big. And if you lose your streak, the biggest insult I can do to you is end a streak. If I end a streak with you, I've essentially broken up with you. Even if we're not boyfriend, girlfriend, I've broken up with you as a friend because I've ended the streak. And that is the biggest slap in the face you can give a kid. So, one of the things that I found interesting, and I haven't used it, but in researching this, the American Academy of Pediatrics actually has a website, and you can see it on the side there, where you can actually go on there, and you can create a family media plan. So I went on, I listed my 4 kids, I listed their ages, and then you just kind of start clicking through it. This is what I'll allow, this is what I won't allow. And then it ends up being a full printout that's multiple pages, and it's a really useful tool. So, just something that you could potentially maybe utilize, or you can encourage people to utilize and get that out there. So I included that as a link on here. But that's, that's the gist of it, folks. And, what I can say is that what we're seeing, and I think we all recognize it, we have a precipitous decline in in-person social interaction. We've got a dramatic increase in screen time. And I think, and again, I can't claim I know causation, but I think that there's a definite deleterious effect on our children's mental health. And I do think that social media plays a part in that. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your time and welcoming me out here. And if we could, I almost thought we'd have more of a conversation, but I'm happy to have that conversation now. As I said, I'm no expert, but I potentially could field some questions and help provide some insight if anybody had anything they wanted to discuss or ask questions. Yes?
I know you plan to college this. I was wondering, maybe you should present this to our high school kids.
This has helped me to have such honest conversation. The question was, maybe we should be presenting this data to our high school kids. I presented it to college kids, they reacted well to it. I, in fact, made 2 of the kids that did a presentation on this book in my class. I have a bunch of books that I give them, and 2 kids presented last week on this. And it was very interesting because they were reflecting on their own use and how it really connected to them. And that was that same comment, you're not wrong. This is pretty close to what we are. I think you're right. I think that this has helped me in my own family with my own children, because instead of, what we've come to realize is that when you tell, and I'm going to go back a little bit, when I was 15 years old, I used to go skating on the pond across the street, and I was an ice hockey player. I loved it. It's all I wanted to do. And we would skate around on that pond, and I'd hear my mom's whistle from across the street, and I was, I don't want to go in. It's the same feeling when you tell them to come out of their world. They don't want to leave their world. I didn't want to leave the ice rink. They don't want to leave their phone. And so I've come to that realization that when I tell my daughter, hey, you need to get off the phone, I'm going to expect a little bit of a snappy response back. Because she's 15 and she's not controlling that emotion right there. So I usually will walk away and I'll come back and say, you know what, that was a little disrespectful. I'm going to have your phone. And it changed everything. Instead of saying, how dare you? Because then the conversation goes like this. And so when we talked about it, I said, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I think that your generation is affected in this way and that way or the other way. And there's really no denying it because the data's there and the kids, my kids, have agreed with me on it. Or at least not fought me on it. Yes?
You mentioned that things that, like physical, sports, homework, or positive things to get them away from them. But did you say social media?
Yeah.
Was that what you meant was those?
So reading books,
Oh,
reading
okay.
magazines, reading newspapers.
Okay.
Yeah, those are.
What was that thing again? Is this reading in school?
So sports was number one, religious activities was number two. The print media was one, actually homework was one. But, really just anything outside of screen, in-person social activity, social interactions are huge. Getting kids access. I had and again, I call myself a survivor because I read this stuff, and my 14-year-old's birthday was April 7th, and we had 28 graders at my house. And I looked at my wife and said, do we really want to do this? And we looked at each other and said, yeah, we do want to do this because we want them in our house. And we put them down in the basement, and it was the loudest. Then they went out and they played manhunt, and they did all these kinds of things. And I was like, after they left, I said, that was great. They a couple of the boys did tear the arms off one of my third graders' dolls, but those things are going to happen. Yes.
You mentioned that in your school district, you do a emotional screening. I was wondering what screening do you use? And then another question, do we do that in Elwood?
We use the BESS, B-E-S-S.
We don't. Dr. Massara and his district are a bit ahead of their studies and research into mindfulness and their practical implications into the classroom. We're in the planning stages, we're in the evaluating stages. It's not something we currently do, it's something we're currently exploring. Because the data that districts are able to glean from that type of information is really helping to inform the work to do with the children. So it's one of the things we're looking at as part of our mindfulness initiative.
Yes.
I was just wondering, are there any theories about why, if these iGen'ers are more inclusive and more tolerant, why the cyberbullying seems to be such a big issue? Because it seems to be,
Yeah, so again, I have to go back to some of the studies that I saw. I don't know if anybody remembers the Milgram study where participants had to administer shocks. And if you were right in front of me, I couldn't do it. But if you're on the other side of the wall, they would administer the shocks in the highest possible level. Even if they could see that person, but they weren't in the same room as that person. I think it has the same effect. The kids sometimes don't know. And the cyberbullying takes so many different, I think it looks so different. Sometimes it's just that weeding out kind of stuff. Sometimes it's more very overt. But you can't escape it. Okay, so when you're on the bus and some bully gave you a wedge, something like that, that happened, okay? But you got out and you went home. Now you go home and they get you on your phone, so you can't escape it. And I think that's why it's more pervasive. It just exists out there.
I feel like they're more tolerant of groups of people, different groups of people, their sexuality or their race but they can attack an individual online.
Yeah, I think you're right about that as well. Yes?
Yesterday was the first time I came to know about this group of anti-predatory male circulation, and I was really surprised by the show's description. So I downloaded the book and I couldn't read all, but I reviewed all the data and the graphs, and then I was really amazed. Because the reason is, I'm a mom of two kids. One is Holly, one is data and tracks everything. And one thing that I briefly want to share with you was all those things is more like symptom of my experience. When we get up fires, we cough, we sneeze, and we get fever. In the same way, all those data is more like symptom. And then the screen is really is a virus, the real cause. Well, in some sense, yes, that's right. Because this screen causes the kids isolate in their mind. They interact with people very different way as we did in the past. For instance, when I meet with my friends in a classroom, or my brothers or my sister, even though we don't like it, sometimes we have to be together. We have to know, understand a different person, and sometimes we fight and we need to learn how to overcome. This young generation, they do not have that skill because they feel they don't know they're isolated. They think they have a lot of friends. However, in social media, if they don't like certain group, they can just move to another.
And I'm going to kind of echo what you're saying there because, and my kids are athletes and they love to play sports, my girls, and they have friends on social media. And I know that they're connected with them, they've met them, over the years they've met them at various things. And I'll say, oh, didn't you know that girl right there? I said, oh yeah. Doesn't even think about walking from here to there to go say hello to that person, but wouldn't think about breaking the streak with that person. And I think that's kind of bizarre.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
I've seen that too with my kids, where they'll be friends with somebody on social media, and then we'll be sitting next to them in Dunkin' Donuts, and they'll loop them and say hi, that they know everything about them. It's
Right.
very weird to me.
And so that's the kind of conversations that we've had too, right? And we say, why won't you go over and say hello? But that's that disconnect, that they don't have the social navigation skills that they really need to develop. And we need to help them get them. And so that's why we have to double and triple down on these kinds of things.
So this isolation makes their heart very weak. The heart is exactly the same as our body. So when our body gets healthy, we need to exercise, good food, and rest. In the same way, when I say people, the young generation, their heart gets more healthier when they can do something they don't want to do. Just like exercise, even when we do something, or when after doing it, we get more so. The same way, when they face somebody they don't want to be together, or when they have to do something when they do not want to do, actually one time, two times when they get to that kind of activity, their heart is getting healthier, but they are losing their kind of opportunity first, this young generation. And secondly, just like body, they need a very good food in their heart. However, their main food is always come from the internet. We cannot say they are because they're healthy either. At least when they have some problems, they can come to teachers or parents, and they can get better answers. Or whenever they have some issue, they just go to the internet and find the answer. I want to commit suicide if they type. There's a lot of way to want to meet other people who want to commit suicide, and even they can find a way how to do it. So they don't really eating good food for their heart either. And then lastly, the rest. Like our body needs a rest. In the same way, heart needs to get rest. When we can get rest is when we can trust each other and we have somebody who understands each other, or with those people, we can get rest in our heart. But young people, just like the social media, they're concerned about reputation and everything. In their heart, they cannot have that kind of relationship with their heart at rest. So all these things, starting from this isolation, make their heart weaker and weaker. So they're concerned about, they don't want to challenge, they prefer more safety, or they're concerned about reputation. It's more like symptom because all these things were caused by their weak heart, because they cannot really take. If you have a very strong heart, even though somebody says something bad to you, you can bear it. very high suicide rate. So we really need to do something for our kids. But more broadly think, when I think about this young generation became their 40s and 50s. Even today, I don't like the politics, but this generation needs this country or this world. What will happen? One thing obvious is long time ago, somebody was physical strength, they became a leader in the society. The next generation was somebody who has knowledge, because all the time, when you think of 500 years ago, 600 years ago, you couldn't really read a book. So somebody who has knowledge became a leader. But probably next generation, somebody who has a strong heart, they will be the leader and they should be the leader of the society. And all those how we can help them, that's what our kids and also for this world and this nation.
So here, John, how do we as the school educators help our kids to become more social? Like now, if 5 years ago, if somebody brought a cell phone into the classroom, it was taken from them and you weren't allowed to carry backpacks, it had to be kept in the locker. Today, they're, they are more
Teachers are using them, it's part of the
teachers are
lesson.
using them, so how do we go about, because, we see this, even the happiest kids have this sadness and this overwhelmingness about them, and it's very sad, and, what can we do? I know you have a psychology background.
No, and I don't pretend to have the answers, but I just think that we need to be engaging kids differently. And I think that we need to be, because, I know with my kids, the new white lie for kids is, I would say, honey, it's 10 o'clock at night, it's time, I gotta go put it in the pen. And I was, well, Dad, I need it for my homework.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not what you need. But that's what they're telling us, and that's what they're gonna tell.
But
But it's not, and so when I said, I'll tell you what, you can have my computer, which has no social media on it, and you can do your homework on there, because you can access Castellan there. No, that's okay. I'm good. Yes.
I just have one comment that I find interesting, that the kids want to be safe and they want to be on all the social media, but that is the exact spot they're the least safe because of predators. So the last presentation that we had, so those statistics were really good, and it's just,
Right, and so that's part of it too, and I think that matters too, because part of that conversation with my own children was, you're feeling this way because, and honest conversation that says, hey, just so you know, there are 60% of the kids your age are feeling anxiety, honey, and they look at me and go, oh, wait, so it's not just me? Oh, that's actually comforting to a kid to recognize that, and to say that my anxiety is coming from this phone, and here's why. They start to, in some way understand it a little bit, not fully, but they start to at least, it has helped, in my house, I know it's helped.
Do you think they recognize it though? Do you think they recognize that their phone and their connection to the internet, their obsession with it is really causing, like she had said, all these symptoms?
All I can tell you is they've acknowledged it, but they're not willing to give it up yet. My one daughter, who I would say has, is most impacted by anxiety from these kinds of things, she's the first to give it up now. She's come to that place, but she is also the one when I took the phone away. She came into my room at around 10 to midnight and said, Dad, I just kept coming back. And I said, what? And I woke up and just, I got to do my streaks. I said, no, that's not going to work. I'm getting it back. And really, I was like, I don't really care about the streaks. So I saw her the next day, or 2 days later, and I said, and she was going to do her streaks. And I said, I thought you lost your streaks. He said, no, actually, I got Allison. So he's got her sister. Yes.
My question, you talked about the use of social media, but what about just general TV? Where does that lie in the risk factors for depression?
TV is on the risk side for depression.
Risk
but not as significant. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you, Carissa Brzezinski, building principal, working in high school for 10 years, and as you're presenting, admittedly, I didn't get a chance to read through all this, because I work in high school, but I was doing a lot of thinking, and I've worked in a high school as an administrator for 10 years, this is my 10th year, and I've seen the change, like, exponentially, like with the cell phones, like, 2007, working in my former district, we had a no cell phone policy. Now it's like under the discretion of the teacher. And as a parent of an two elementary kids who I see now have the iPhone and the iPad, it's just like I'm at this like both ends of the spectrum. So I was just thinking, again, thank you for having this conversation because that can help me continue to have the conversation with parents, teachers, and students. But I also think that as parents, our job is to protect our children from the unknown. And there's always going to be an element of things that we don't know that our parents didn't know and so on and so forth. So the more that we just become aware, I think we're better equipped to protect them and have those conversations. And I think there are some universal truths to parenting and leading, like balance and boundaries. And kids want healthy boundaries. So some of the things that our teachers are doing in the classroom, come in, put your phones away. And some teachers are doing it, they have good relationships with kids, and the high school students are responding, because I think they want us to tell them to kind of shut it off. But at the same time, we don't want to say, like, you're so bad because you're the screenagers. We have to also embrace who they are and find a balance. The social piece that I was just thinking about, and I'm sure the psychologist people did a better job than I will at this point, we are social beings, and I know I read somewhere that we get endorphins from hugging one another and being socially connected. So I wonder if there's a connection between that less interaction. So I think finding a balance to help our children, the students, negotiate both worlds at the same time simultaneously is going to be our next challenge. So I just want to thank you.
Yeah, agreed, and thank you. Yes.
I think almost everybody would be pretty happy with the district-wide no cell phones allowed in class policy. Most of the kids, I think, almost feel like they have to have it because the other kid has it, and the teacher lets them, so they do it. And you get text from your kid during the day, like, what, are you in class right now? You know, it's...
Most of those texts are for parents.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we have to negotiate.
just to chime in on that note, I teach in another district. I know I've been in many conversations about that, but most parents want to be in contact with their kids if there's an emergency now. Like they want this case to have their phone so they can connect. That's what we found.
That would be our biggest obstacle to a no cell phone policy, is that I respect your opinion. I think the largest percentage of parents we would hear from would not support such a policy. That need to be in constant communication with the children in the event of an emergency. I think
Whatever
that's safe.
happened to calling the school office? Seriously.
Is there any research that looks at not just how much screen time it is, but, all right, if your 8th grader is on the screen, not doing homework, but 6 hours a day, is there research about the families that don't allow that? Like, is it the screen that's doing it, or the characteristic of their family that would allow something like that?
Well, I mean, I think no, there's no research that says that, what does the family dynamic look like in a high users, is that what you're looking at?
Right, because then you can really look at the way your family operates. I don't know, it seems like people that don't, there's parental controls on phones that you can just shut them off from 10 to 6 in the morning. Then it's nobody, then I don't need to take it from you, it just turns off.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering, is it really the screen time, or is it the lack of somebody saying, no, that's not good for you?
Well, I mean, obviously, parenting, there's lots of research on different parenting styles, right? And you can look at that as one thing, but what this research is looking at is what's your reported screen time and what does that do? to
Right,
your
and I wonder if that's a bigger extraneous variable.
And it might be, and that's why I said,
Right.
like, we can't say that the correlations are absolute causality, but what we
Right.
can say is that, there's some evidence suggesting that it may be leading toward these kinds of problems, this mental health crisis that we're facing.
So one of the takeaways for me, and I think this is why this goes back to what you were saying, in competing with this phone time, the value that I place now is so much greater on these non-screening activities than before. We see kids on a soccer field, across clubs, that bring them together, playing in orchestra, chorus, theater, music, teaching students to be in the moment, focused on one task. We're talking about 20 minutes and 20 seconds, and then onto the next screen. If you've ever sat and watched a rehearsal, your children practice a sport, they're hours focused on one task and learning specific skills that they're going to perform at that level. The value that I place, and maybe we as parents and us as a school district should place on those type of activities, has just gone up because of what you just presented. Those are the things that are going to compete and that we can somewhat control by our enthusiasm and opportunities that we present our kids for these activities. It's tough to compete with this. It really is. But if you have the opportunities readily available and we show that there's value in that and that there's some sort of social acceptance in our community of students who excel and do those type of things, maybe we can start to get away from this on those after-school hours and on those Saturdays and Sundays when no one's around, where they may be competing with something.
You know, about 6 or 7 years ago, we brought back valedictorian to talk to elementary kids. And when the kids were talking to her, the first thing she said was the reason she was successful was because she made sure she wasn't on any kind of social media when she was doing her homework, and that she limited it. And I, at the time, I remember thinking, that's a pretty incredible insight for a 17-year-old girl. And now I think about it, and it just, it's even more brilliant now that I think about that was 5 or 6 years ago when she said that.
The social media piece, just one last thing, quick story. My son found his job as controller for a company up in Massachusetts on social media. He just didn't hire somebody for the finance department because of their presence in social media. So there's the good of it and bad of it. However, we do need to make kids aware of that social media presence and profile sticks. It doesn't even go away.
You know, something, when you were talking about social engagement, we recently had a snow day. I'm going to mention this, Dr. Foster. And Dr. Foster put out a challenge to his students on this snow day to build a snowman. Does everybody know that?
Yes.
I know because my neighbor. And I first I thought, oh my God, it's such a geeky thing to do. But that's the case.
My usual action.
But if you know it, if you know Ken as well as I do, he was doing it purposefully for this kind of reason.
Exactly. And I think it took me about midway through the afternoon because I had 3 iGen'ers who watched everybody on YouTube, like you were saying about your daughter, and they were outside, and they kept coming to grab, Mom, here's your board shirt that has, and I said, and then it really clicked. So it was a way, I think that's a positive thing that we could do, like you were saying, just encourage them into little by little things to do that
Through their world.
through their world, right? It's ingenious.
Yes.
Something in your presentation struck me, the idea of that camp when they moved away. And something that I noticed, particularly with my own children, I have 5 of them, and we go camping every year. And where we go, there's no cell service. And they're there with a whole group of people, and my kids never look for it. It's never even an issue. And they're so relaxed, and they're fishing, they're hiking, they're boating, and they're going the whole day. As soon as we're in the park coming home and we get to a certain spot, we can get cell service. And what strikes me about this is when they're home or they're in places where there's ability to access it, you can see that they are consciously aware and there's almost like an anxiety and they don't.
You can feel the tension.
You can feel the tension. And when you take that away, and they know it's like it's not an option, nor is it an option for anyone around them. It's like a decompression. And, I don't know where the solution is, but there is definitely a difference. And I would say, I would imagine that that's why you see those kinds of results in the camp. But so much of their lives, they're wondering what other people are doing. They're wondering, and that tension level.
Personal family anecdote. My father is someone who prides himself in being able to identify a penny stock that's about to explode. He likes to do his research and invest very little money and see what happens. It's one of his hobbies, and he's had some hits and misses. One company that he couldn't stop talking about created cell phone blockers. And it's something that was intended to be commercially produced to put in restaurants and theaters and other places where people on devices are offensive to other people trying to enjoy the experience. And he thought this was the next $1 million idea because every restaurant, every theater, every venue would want this for their establishment. Then he got real excited when he found out that Mark Cuban had also invested in this company. He was like, this is it, easy streets ahead. The company wasn't successful and went bankrupt because those businesses that invested in the cell blocker, nobody wanted to go there because they lost access to their devices while they were there. So it's not just the kids.
Isn't that where the problem is? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
where the problem comes from.
You know,
The adults and.
There's so much of what struck me about Twang's research and what Ron presented tonight, but one of the things that I find to be most interesting is that this data is relevant to all classes, all races, all walks of life. That was part of the most interesting part to me. There's no separation between household income. There's no separation between cultures. It is applicable to our society. And I think it's where we are. Anyone else have a take, a point they would like to share with the group? I have to publicly thank Dr. Sarah, who did an incredible job summarizing the work. And as I said, Ron is here because he feels that it's an important message, and I would ask each of you who would agree is to engage in this dialogue with at least one other person, guide them to our website. This presentation will be on the YouTube channel as early as tomorrow, and let's continue the conversation. This is the beginning of a dialogue, not the end of a dialogue, and many of the things, many of the takeaways that we have from the research will inform our instruction and our programs and the way that we guide this school district, and maybe how you have some thoughts that you have in your own households. But thank you so much for being part of the dialogue, and have a wonderful night.